I am 42 years old, hot lady here is my wet pussy story for you all. Let's start these. Days I don't go out much because me husband is constantly working and doesn't seem to be thinking about retiring. I spend the majority of my days at home by myself feeling utterly Alan desperate and bored. My husband was on abusing his trip in London this weekend and he didn't want to spend any more nights by myself. I gazed out my window at the rain outside, which was glistening in the light from the lamp posts on the streets off London. I made the decision to let my hair down that evening. I walked through the streets outside Died. I made the decision to visit my favorite bar on Garabi Street, which is lined with autumn leaves. The Parakeet was one of those establishments that hadn't kept up with the times. It was still stuck in the 1980s with its colorful seats, mismatched chairs, and the aroma of ale and damp wood. It was a cozy place, really, when I saw him. I had just finished my first gin and tonic, sitting in the farthest corner. Off the pub, the only person without a wrinkled face or a pint in hand, looked out of place despite our distance. Could tell he was younger, no older than 24. And when he looked at me, smiled at me in the tiniest, most tentative way, as if he was just as hot to see me as I was to see him. It quickly turned away as I felt my cheeks get hot from being flustered in Adicione. Felt our eye contact, which caused Mr. Mac to flip violently like two magnets pulling together. I sensed they was observing me. Maybe he wasn't certain and pondering whether or not I liked him. I sipped my drink slowly, while glancing back at the corner where he was sitting and trying to convey to him that he had noticed that I had instantly captured his attention by meeting his gaze over the glass's rim, just as red and flushed as before. He looked away from me and broke eye contact, but had glanced back as if he couldn't resist. His eyes were as inquisitive as puppy dogs, awaiting my order to move, and his lips were puckered. Following several more of these wary looks, he finally got out, his feet holding the glass a bit too firmly. I could tell he was anxious about whether he was making the right choice. He wasn't as shy as he appeared to be, and I could tell there was more to him. Perhaps I was intrigued by that. Would it be okay if I joined you? There was a faint accent that persisted in his tone-off voice, but he did not sound wholly from London, Britain. Sure, I smiled, because of a faint quaver in his voice and the almost archaic politeness with which Hess spoke. I raised an eyebrow and said, "Oh, no need condition, only if you tell me why you're here tonight all alone." I jokingly pondered whether pushing him beyond his comfort zone would reveal whatever he was concealing. His cheeks were still hooded and flushed as he gulped and glanced down at his drink before turning back to face me. "I guess you and I are both here for the same reason. I simply needed a little change, all right?" I touched the vacant seat next to me. He took the chair a bit too quickly, and I watched him as if my gaze had already entered his subconscious, causing him to fidget and jitter. He told me that his name was Sherry, which made me laugh. Outraditional name, but seemed to suit him well despite his youth. He exuded an old-fashioned charm that brought back memories of my own childhood, when I would wander the streets of London wearing borrowed clothing and daydreaming endlessly. "What is your name, then? Have you lived in London all your life, or have you had other lovers? I mean places in the past." "Elena is my name," I purred as I slowly and deliberately traced the rim of my glass with my fingertip. "Yes. I have spent the majority of my life in London, but both the city and my appetites have evolved. You know how the years tend to make things more arid." His cheeks flushed a little as he nodded. It was delightfully endearing to see the effort he was making to keep up. This man sitting across from me made me want to serve up a feast, and you eyes kept me eyes lingering on his lips. "You don't sound like a native Londoner," I said. My husband never seemed interested in my flavors. Instead, it seemed like he did his best to avoid tasting them. "Where were you raised?" "Like a man picking the ideal wine for a situation." He paused and looked down at his glass while deciding what to say. "I was drawn to the city, haven't thou? I'm from the countryside, the Cotswolds to be exact. It always seemed more exciting to be in London, a place where you could get caught up in the asterisk moment and then untangled again." His eyes revealed who he was, even though his words were measured. I took another sip of my drink and leaned back in my chair, feeling the warmth creep through me like a slow, lazy touch. That's how. When Duncan be, you need the right die. I said in a low, friendly voice. But if you're not careful, it's easy to get entangled in all the wrong ways. I grinned, allowing the promise to linger like a subtle asterisk. Alluring scent, he looked at me, then his gaze intense, and searching with an eyebrow raised his mouth, moved forming at me. Oh, as I watched him, I wondered Wave saw. Did he see just an older woman and is he conversation, or someone who lived her life and had begun fading quietly into the background, maybe? I was wrong. Did he see something else? Did he see? I was still alive, still hungry and burning, still yearning for something undefinido. You like to play with fire? He asked, a wit smile dancing on his lips. I felt a flush of heat in my belly, a sensation he hadn't felt in far too long. Well, that depends. I replied, my voice a sultry purr. What kind of heat are you looking to ignite? I held his gaze, the between you crackling with an electric tension that was anything but subtle. Sometimes you have to dance with the devil to truly know your desires. His eyes sparked with intrigue, a hunger that belied his innocent act. He leaned in, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down my spine. And what about you? Have you ever played with matches? I was taken aback, a thrill of excitement coursing through me. Took a slow, deliberate sip of my drink, me eyes never leaving his. I had mentioned my husband to Harry, and at that moment I didn't care. This was about me. About us. Oh, I've done more than that, he admitted. My voice was a husky whisper when I was younger, hungry, eager to explore every dark corner, every hard to reach place. I would take any risk for a taste of ecstasy. His breath hitched, and he could see the images playing out in his mind. He was enjoying this as much as I was. I leaned in, my lips almost brushing his ear. Tell me, Harry whispered, my voice dripping with sin. What would you risk for a taste of the forbidden, for a chance to do something deliciously unforgettable? He squirmed, his eyes darting to my mouth, then back to my eyes. I could see the battle raging within him, the temptation wearing with his hesitation. I'm not sure, he confessed, his voice barely audible. He shifted in his seat, trying to discreetly adjust his stance. But I think I would risk a lot, hesitated, his voice thick with desire, and he looked at me with eyes full of lust and anticipation, clearly wanting me to guide him down this new and exciting path. There was something vulnerable about him, something that made me want to pull him closer, to reassure him and prove that it would be the right thing to take a chance on a risk. For a moment, my mind shifted to my husband. I felt a sense of guilt, but like Harry, I was willing to risk a lot. I couldn't help myself. I reached out towards Harry, my hand brushing against his. The warmth of his skin against my own made my spine feel fuzzy. Although it was only a small gesture, it held so much weight. He didn't pull away from me. He looked down at our hands slowly, curling his fingers around mine, still not entirely given everything up to me, but willing to. I felt an excitement pulsating in my veins, thrill of this young man who had somehow wandered into my life and madam feel alive again, much less alone. And in ways beautiful, we stayed with our hands and twinned the silence between us thick with unspoken possibilities. Finley, I gave him a gentle smile as an invitation to take the next step. Would you like to take a walk with me? I asked if I had lost all my confidence, and then my voice turned into barely more than our whisper. He nodded, his gaze steady on me as though he had made up his mind. Some time ago, we left that pub together, hands still holding on to each other. We stepped into the quiet London night, the rain softening into a gentle drizzle. Although the streets of London are usually busy, that night it was quiet. The streets were empty, as if the world had stilled for a moment. Walked through Covent Garden towards the river. The shops were already closed and their lights dimmed. The tongue waited up ahead, still with a reflection of the moon across the waters. Harry kept his hand in mine, his grip growing confident with each step. I could feel his excitement. The drizzle clung to our hair. World around us, feeling both surreal and strangely closed, like we were the only two people left in the city. With every step, I took with Harry. It seemed that my husband took a step further away from my thoughts. I glanced at her nervously, seeing his profile and iridescence of the street light, the soft line of his jaw, his lashes brushing against his cheek, the way his eyes shone brightly as he took in everything around us. Do you indulge in this path? Often hissed his voice, a low rumble that sent a gentle wave of anticipation through me. From time to time I replied, a soft smile playing on my lips. There's something's unsold out the river, don't you think? Asterisk. The way it flows so steady, and sure he nodded his gaze, dropping to our hands still entwined. His thumb tracing circles in my skin. I'm drawn to the river. I thought the city would be overwhelming, but nights like this, they are quiet and intimate. The river is a perfect place to linger. We sat in a comfortable silence. River's gentle rhythm, a stark contrast to the overwhelming pulse of my heart. When I looked at him again, high sighs were on me. Soft and hungry, you're unique, he murmured, his voice like a chorus. I've never met anyone like you. It smiled, slow and seductive. You haven't encountered women like me. I suppose wouldn't go out. He shook his head, a small smile on his lips to play frequently. I did not mean that you simply see things that I do not. You have a profound understanding of the world, as if you possess a secret knowledge that I am only now starting to realize. Perhaps you're just awakening to the joys of the world, or perhaps I do. I said, tracing the length of his fingers in a silent invitation with a burning question in his eyes. He hesitated, his lips parted. Ash finally turned to face me, and I couldn't stop staring at them, waiting for them to touch me. His voice was barely audible. As he whispered, is it okay if I lean in? His husky plea briefly sent a chill of desire down my spine, as if the entire night had been waiting for his exact query. London stopped around you, a excitement rushed through me, and I could hear my heart thumping. Through my blouse looked at me as if I were still the woman I once was, the one I occasionally still discovered within myself, and he was so young and honest. I was briefly separated from our connection by really considered telling him about my husband. But in the end, I decided the risk was too great. I gradually leaned closer to him until our faces were just a few centimeters apart. His eyes were full of desire, and his breath felt warm against my skin. My own barriers were dissolving. Yes, I nodded, but only I fear prepared to be eaten. I muttered at first. The kiss was tender, as if he was afraid of making a mistake for a brief moment. I was concerned about whether he thought I was too experienced. Perhaps he thought it came with my age. He hadn't inquired about my husband, and he questioned whether he sensed my presence. But he took my hand, brought it on my face, and held it there. He finally relaxed into me, letting go of whatever was preventing him from doing so. We withdrew just enough to keep our foreheads in contact. I made a snap decision because I had no idea how many more opportunities one would have to take advantage of this opportunity. While my husband was away for the weekend, feeling as though my choice had become a comment mate, I whispered, Harry, would you like to return to mine? He had become more confident with me, and he made needy contact, even though his eyes widened, and I could see the color seeping into his cheeks. He nodded this time and tightened his grip on my hand while taking a big gulp before we left our seat to start the short walk to my house. Gave me a quick peck on the mouth, which made me feel a little queasy. I stalked Harry a few doors down from my house. When we got to my street, thinking about what might happen if my husband found out made me feel anxious. What if in some cruel twist of fate my husband happened to be home when we got to Theodore, and our game of risk ended because I remembered my promise before I took my hand off Harry's arm and gave him a warm smile. I told him to leave. I gave him permission to enter my home first. There were no lights in, and we were the only ones who cemento. Be home, I discovered that I had run out of opportunities with my cards when he switched on the light. It was evident that a man shared my home because it was furnished with both my husband's and my personal belongings. On the shoe rack at the door, his work boots were arranged in rows. I saw Harry whiz as he glanced down at the shoes, realizing that I Knew he had to tell my husband the truth I can't explain. I started Harry, wiped the hurt expression from his face, and nodded his head. He waves a hand at me as Thotto beckoned my husband away, saying, I don't want to hear it, really. I questioned him not. Sure, if he felt at ease in my house any longer, he put a hand on my back. Todd drew me in closer as he nodded at me, he lightly pressed his thumb against my lip with his free hand, then traced the contours of my jaw with a finger before using his thumb too. Opened my mouth, his voice was full of surprise as he whispered, You are beautiful. I smiled as I noticed that I was blushing. I slowly took his hand in mine and led him to my sofa where we sat next to each other, letting myself forget about my husband dance. More when we got there, our lips met once more this time with much greater fervor this time. I gave myself permission to finally unwind and melt. Into him, my peaks were taut and ready for him. And he delivered. He became more assured with every second that went by in a moment that seemed to last forever, wove together, entwined our hearts pulsing in time, encircled by one another's arms. I was unprepared for his subtle growth. The edges of my wet patels were waiting for him. I shuddered in excitement. This was unexpected. I never imagined that at 65 and married to a man for 40 years I would be here, sharing a bond with someone who regarded me as the night's biggest catch. As the night went on, I reached for him and wrapped my hand around his fishing rod, moving in time with his ministrations. We remained close bonded like glue and experienced a calm joy that spoke to my spirit in a way I hadn't experienced in years. As the night wore on, and the first rays of dawn filtered through my living room's windows, it was more than just desire. With his hand intertwined with mine and his head resting on my shoulder, we lay together in cozy silence. I closed my eyes and relished the quiet and privacy of this moment. Asterisk, I hope you liked this wet story. If you really like this, kindly subscribe my channel and press bell icon for more wet stories for your knowledge. Love you all.